Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the ATI podcast. We appreciate all of our guests tuning in live for our live interview segment. For this week, episode 43, we have a very special guest with us, Ian Fischer. Ian, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How about you, gentlemen?
We're doing fantastic. We appreciate you coming on the show. And, you know, we just kind of wanted to start by introducing you to our audience here and how I became familiar with your work specifically. We talked a little bit before we got on the call today. And that is, you know, I came across your Instagram and I really enjoyed the pop art that you're doing with the custom edit trailers and reels on your Instagram in particular. I know that you also have that on TikTok too, but, you know, a lot of films that I enjoy, things like Evil Dead, Halloween, you're doing your own spin with it, and you're putting some humorous music at times, some pretty cool music choices in my opinion.
It's great.
And I just love the aesthetic of it, and I think it's kind of darkly comedic at times. I really enjoy that aspect of it too. So it's just kind of hits me in all the right spots and all the right feels.
Thank you.
So if anybody hasn't noticed Ian's work yet, just check us out on Instagram. We've shared a lot of Ian's work. Ian also has an Instagram himself, and we've tagged him in our stories, and he will be tagged on all of our information going forward. And Ian, I just kind of wanted to get started too. You know, initially what I saw in your art, and I know a lot of people will say this with anybody that does pop art, is, you know, immediately I had some kind of flashes of Andy Warhol and even kind of Dave Gibbons, the comic book artist. He did The Watchmen with Alan Moore back in the 80s. And, you know, and he was a huge inspiration to a lot of other people, and a guy I think you're familiar with, which we'll get to eventually here in the interview. But that's what drew me to it also, is just that aesthetic. And I was just kind of curious what your influences are, like what inspires you artistically, what was kind of the initial linchpin to kind of get you in this mode, particularly with the pop art.
Well, growing up, I learned to read from comic books, and reading the comics of Dave Gibbons and people like Steve Rude, and who I actually made a documentary on. Right. And it was comic books that really helped me learn to form a visual vocabulary. And then my dad loved pop art and exposed me to a lot of Warhol and Keith Haring. And this is back in the 80s, before the movement had really, while it was still in that bubble. Mm-hmm. And artists like Gilbert and George, if you've heard of them. In England. I realized a lot of that aesthetic and a lot of movies. I know you said you love movies, and certainly the old rotoscoping techniques that where they would film actors in real life, and then they would animate over it. I believe in films like Snow White. And then, like Ralph Bakshi was a big fan of that with the animated Lord of the Rings and Fire and Ice, right? And things like that, which is a very high contrasty, flat, very comic book aesthetic that was very graphic, that those films really leaned into in a time before we had, CGI animated, right? Pixar, beautiful films that recreate life a little bit more accurately while still putting their artistic spin on it. And that kind of flat, aesthetic. I mean, I think the closest film that did it was that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, they did a great job.
Really groundbreaking with a lot of the ways they recreated the misprinting and that kind of comic book pulp aesthetic, especially from like the 60s and 70s computer printing and all that.
Right. And I know sometimes pop art influences in various ways, particularly like in film. It's across all forms of media, advertising, music. A lot of people, a lot of examples, and what we mentioned in the open, a lot of people probably are familiar with the work of an Andy Warhol, if you will, and things like his Campbell Soups cans and the Marilyn Monroe pictures that were very famous as well. And I was just kind of wondering, outside of just the comic book art, was there other forms of media in the pop art realm that influenced you at a young age that you really feel like impacted your work?
Well, going to museums with my dad really exposed me to a lot of it. And I didn't realize it actually was pop art.
Right.
And it took me a long time to realize there are two different versions of pop art. There's the British school of it, which is the outsider way of looking in, which is for the comic book fans, that's more like an Alan Moore aesthetic, looking into superheroes and what makes them American and kind of breaks them down and brings them back together in a new way that has, helped establish this wave of creativity in superhero movies and all that. But then there's the English, which is within the bubble and more, the American, which is more inside the bubble and more celebratory of that.
Right.
And what was it? The Ed Rousberg, I believe it is.
Yes.
His signs are absolutely amazing. That he did those truck stop signs. And I mean, gosh, there's just so many. And
Roy Lichtenstein was a guy that was pretty popular in America too, and I think he had like the American flags that were real popular that he did. Like it was American flags on top of American flags, or maybe I'm misappropriating that with the wrong artist.
That is not that artist, unfortunately.
Okay.
The artist you're talking about, Roy Lichtenstein, he's the guy who recreated the comic book panels.
That's right.
And is very kind of
real bold black lines.
Yes, but considered very controversial amongst comic book artists because they wonder, well, did he create anything or did he just kind of enlarge it and put it on a canvas?
Right.
But it was people like Roy who celebrated what at the time was considered a pretty junky art form, which was comic books. I mean, comic books at that time were written and they specifically were targeted for children.
Right.
And so these were things that when you were an adult, you didn't want to be caught dead reading.
Right.
But this was a celebration of what is a uniquely American art form.
Right, for sure.
Especially that of the superhero. But, so it was things like that. I mean, there was also outside of the official, pop art scene, but it would be like the Pink Floyd album covers.
Yeah.
Those guys. But I came to a lot of it through collecting comics in the 80s.
That's awesome.
That is very cool. And ultimately, you're a filmmaker by trade, and I would assume that there's some formative films that you grew up on, inspired you, and that sort of thing. What are some films along the way that really kind of set that path for you to, pursue being a filmmaker?
Well, people laugh at this, but Evil Dead 2 is the movie that I saw in the theater, and it sent me to film school.
That's awesome.
And it was films like that, Phantasm.
Yeah.
I was one of those VHS babies, and that was one of the first VHS available. Was Phantasm. The superhero stuff like Tim Burton's Batman. So what's that? Batman 89, 87 or 89, I think it was. that movie really hit my sweet spot at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It still holds a special place in my heart to this day.
And then I would read this magazine, Film Threat. And so I was, which is now a website, but they were some of the first people, and this is pre-internet, that were really pushing like John Woo and like Quentin Tarantino and that kind of early 90s. Yeah. Kind of, this is the cool factor. What else is going on? And it was extra cool because no one had access to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You had to find it in some dingy little VHS shop if you were lucky.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of that. But it was also a lot of music videos, especially, you know, I remember when MTV kind of first came out, or at least when I first was able to watch it. And those early music videos were all pop art aesthetic.
Right. Yeah, very much so. And is there any special mentors that you had along the way too? Just, I mean, I know you mentioned your dad had taken you to museums and things like that, but was there anybody in your life that you feel like kind of influenced you through you know, being a creative person?
Sure. There was a painter here. I grew up in Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C., and she was a relatively well-known Polish kind of abstract, a lot of splatter paint, more along of Pollock.
Yeah, Jackson Pollock.
Right, Jackson Pollock. Yeah. I never say the name out loud, so you know, it's weird to say. Anyways, more along the lines of that, and she really kind of supported that. And then in film school, I had a couple mentors, like Terry Southern, who wrote Easy Rider, and Dr. Strangelove. And then James Goldstone was a director who he directed the second pilot for Star Trek.
Oh, wow.
And cast like Scotty and all those people.
Oh, wow.
So certain people like that were really beneficial and really helpful.
And what would you say that, as far as your work that you've done to date, is something that really exemplifies a lot of your influences? If you were to introduce a new person, let's say our audience, for example, to a piece of your work, what is something that you say is indicatively Ian Fischer?
Boy, well, I kind of try to do that with this daily video art that I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be when I went to film school, which was pre-internet, there was nothing to do with a short film, and you could maybe get it on the cable if you were lucky, or maybe like German TV.
Yeah.
And there were maybe under 100 film festivals, and you had to strike a film print, which was thousands of dollars. It was so ridiculous. There was nothing to do with your work. And once the internet kind of opened that door and kind of democratized who could see things and who couldn't, you know, it used to be about the short films, but that was 15, 20 minutes of a person's time. Right. And I've done the film festival circuit, and that's lovely and amazing, but only to a certain point. And after so many years, it loses its thrill factor. And then I made this feature documentary, and that's for someone else. So what I decided to do was try to do something every single day, any of these videos, and just say, like, this is the best I had today. And with that, hopefully there's some Ian Fischer there, whatever that means. Yeah. But I kind of feel like this is the best I could do, everything I got for today, but at least there's going to be a lot more for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that. And that's a very cool concept. And I didn't really realize that was kind of the effort behind the work too, was, you know, every day that you are making yourself do this every day and putting forth your best effort for that day. And then you get to start all over again tomorrow. Right. So in many ways, that's kind of rewarding, because I know one thing I kind of walked away from doing so much artwork as I did in the past, and it was very emotionally draining to me. Mm-hmm. And sometimes things didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. and I would take too much time to get to that next project, and time would get further and further apart. And I think taking this approach that you have, you're keeping yourself busy, so you almost are too busy to have that worry in your mind. You keep pressing forward. It's like, a new day is a new opportunity. So I mean, that excites me. That's a really great idea, and that's really good advice for a lot of people.
That's a good approach to it, right?
Thank you. Well, I'll tell you how I got to it, which is I made a short film called Magritte Moment, and from initial concept to finally finishing it was a good 2.5 years. It took me 2 years to find the story and to edit it.
Wow.
And I promised myself I wouldn't take that long again. And then when I went and made a documentary on one of my artistic heroes, Steve Rude, that all in took me about 6 years. And that took about 2 to edit the full feature.
Wow.
And so I was working on another documentary on the popularity of superheroes in America and what it says about American culture. Mm. And I just couldn't put years of my life back into a project.
Right.
And so it really took for COVID to hit,
right, to
me to stop running in that same kind of race trap that everyone who moves to LA has, which is I need to have my script and my pitch book, and I need to be pitching my feature. I realized that with COVID, filmmaking as I knew it, is completely changed.
Sure.
Especially on the low budget, under $500,000 budget range.
Right.
It's just that no longer exists in the way it used to, and I don't even know how to do that. And with the streamers and this and that, so what happened was I noticed someone I'm friends with on Instagram. He's a filmmaker, and his name's Lance Wheeler. And he started posting AI art that he was creating before Midjourney and all those. I guess he has his own proprietary thing. Okay. And he's in January of last year, so that's 2021. He literally posted, "I'm making art every single day." And I thought, man, that's bold. I don't have the balls for that. But after a few days, I thought, why don't I try something? And I had played around and kind of created this short little art form while teaching myself After Effects, like 21 years ago after 9/11 in New York City. And which was trying to play with rotoscoping and to teach myself this stuff. At the time, there was nothing to do with it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's only now with social media, there's really something to do with this. So anyways, I made a video, and I literally pulled it out of my ass, and it got a good enough response that I just said, well, I'll do another one, but I'm never going to announce I'm making one every day.
Right.
And so since January 2021, I've been making them every day.
Wow. What was the first that you did?
The first one are these, I can send it to you. It's these kids running against like this kaleidoscope background.
Okay.
And the difficult thing about this is because I don't have any reference points with what I'm doing, I don't know what other people who are doing the same thing.
Yeah,
I have to kind of create the standard and create what these boundaries are and what this is.
Right.
And so what it is it's an attempt to bring back video art.
Yeah.
And a complete rejection against what is most current times right now. Binge watching is the most popular consumption way for older people.
Right.
The other is people watching the video, if not on Instagram, on TikTok.
That's right.
I read that people are consuming at least 95 minutes a day.
Yeah, I can believe that. Yeah,
that's a feature film. I mean, that amazes me.
Right.
For sure.
Right.
And short attention spans. I know we're both fathers, and we see it in our kids as young as they are, even. And really, what you're doing, the application specifically on social media and utilizing things like Instagram Reels and TikTok, I think it's the perfect application. you're able to hit those target audiences. And I think the uniqueness of your work too. I mean, it grabbed me immediately. I've been a fan ever since, and I'm really look forward to your drops every time you have a new one.
Thank you.
I'll binge watch you.
Thank you. I mean, I'm almost up to 700 of these things, and which is like almost 700 music cues, figuring out what to do, having no idea, figuring out what is too long, what is too short. When I first started this, I had taught filmmaking for a decade back in New York, and I taught spec commercials, how you make those. And so I tied myself to the 15-second spot, the 30-second spot, because in traditional broadcast, that's how long a commercial is. It's either going to be a 15-second spot, a 30-second spot, two 15-second spots, or if it's a Super Bowl spot, it's going to be a full minute.
Right.
And then I realized on the internet, nobody cares.
Yeah. I hear you.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, in commercials, I was actually doing a deep dive on your website, and I noticed. Did you do a commercial for Coca-Cola? I saw.
I did a spec commercial for Coca-Cola.
Okay.
I mean, boy,
I thought it was a pretty funny commercial.
Thank you. Yeah, that was the early aughts.
Yeah, I think the premise was that a baseball came near a guy sitting on a bench, and he acted like he was hit by the baseball because an attractive woman approached the bench, and he was rubbing a Coca-Cola on his forehead. But I thought it was great.
It's brilliant. Yeah,
that was old enough. We shot it on film.
Oh wow! Okay,
nice.
Now speaking of film, I would imagine I did watch your short films, Marguerite Moment, as well as Feet, and I was going to ask how Marguerite Moment. In particular was shot?
That was shot on 35 millimeter film. We used anamorphic lenses.
Okay.
For that to create that really shallow depth of field, which gives you those weird kind of shapes in the background.
Yes.
But are really next to impossible when you're shooting to actually keep everything in focus. So using that, I learned having made that movie that using that technique, which is more of like how they shot Westerns, it's what they call widescreen, really widescreen.
Yeah.
Focus is because I wonder why, but they don't have film cameras shooting 35 or 60 that are autofocus. So everything's manually focused, or at least has been since the last time I shot film. And so it eats through your day.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So that was that one. And Feet I shot on a 16 millimeter camera.
Okay.
And then I started I switched to digital as quickly as I could.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Even though I'm certainly in the group with the other film snobs, but
I hear you.
Ease of use.
Yeah, right. I know. Yeah, I'm sure workflow and everything. You can just kind of surmise it all into that too. And before we pass on Marguerite Moment too much, I did want to talk about it briefly because I did notice that you got some attention reviews from Roger Ebert.
Yes.
And it was at 46 film festivals worldwide, I believe. You received like 12 different awards for it as well.
I think it eventually tapped out at like over 50 plus festivals, and it won a couple of Best of Fests. I mean, this was over, how long ago was this? This was over 10 years ago. This was like 15 years ago. It's funny. What happened with Feet was it originally was distributed by Lloyd Kaufman of Troma.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And it was part of his Best of Troma Dance. So if you don't know about this, I could give you a 2-second tour, which is that. So in Park City, Sundance comes, right? And that's the big film festival, or has been as long as film festivals before COVID were considered a big deal. Then Slam Dance came in and said, we don't care if this is your town. We're doing our own thing at the same time. Okay. And that was like, and they discovered like Paranormal Activity, but that was like really punk at the time.
Right.
And that was like in 96, 97, they did that. Then you cut to around 2000. and everybody is walking into that town creating their own dance, a competing festival. One of those was Lloyd Kaufman's Troma Dance.
Okay.
And it played at Sundance for at least 10 years, and now he moves it around. So anyways, he had my movie, but nothing much was happening with it. And I did a recut. And at the time, when I did that recut, it was playing in more festivals than my brand new movie, my passion project, which was Magritte Moment.
Mm-hmm.
So it was incredibly frustrating to have an older movie get more heat than the new one, because I felt, this is a real new one.
Right.
And this is the best version of my work because I'm older now, and all of that kind of stuff. And the lesson I learned from it, my mom turned to me and said, "You're getting attention. Who cares from what?"
Sure. Fair.
And that really changed it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. It takes people to put things in perspective for you sometimes without question. Whenever I watched Magritte Moment, like kind of just initially, some of the aesthetics, some of the editing and choices and that sort of stuff, my mind immediately went to Spun. That's a movie that I loved when I was younger. My dad let me watch it. Yeah, we rented it on VHS.
Your dad let you watch that movie? Wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I believe that movie has more edits than any other film around.
It could.
That's Jonas Ackerland, I believe, made it. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that movie holds the record for the most edits of any movie.
I believe it. I didn't know that, but yeah, I could definitely believe it without question. There's a lot of creative stuff going on with that, and I don't know if there's any crossover there, if there was any inspiration, but to me, for whatever reason, that's the initial, like, with some of the editing, some of the pacing, and how the film speeds up in places. Kind of that time lapse feel in some of the segments and the shots. That's just kind of my immediate impression was.
What I really tried to do with that film at the end of the day was make a film that dream logic works, which is kind of like the David Lynch or Donnie Darko. The connections make emotional sense. They don't make logic sense. It falls apart as soon as you think about it, but it feels good. It should make sense. We're trying to figure out why it should make sense. It's like you meet a stranger and they look familiar and you're trying to figure that out, right?
Right. For sure.
And so with that, I really tried to do something along the lines of, if you wrote down a bullet list, A, B, C, D, it doesn't really make sense, but it feels like it should. The way the music carries through and the imagery, in the same way, like Twin Peaks doesn't really make all that much sense if you break it down. But it's another show. It was one of the most influential things ever for me.
Yeah,
that certainly sent me to film school too.
Yeah. Right behind David Cronenberg, who was my favorite director of all time, is probably David Lynch and Stanley Kubrick's in that conversation. But yeah, Twin Peaks, man, you won me over with that comment.
What did you think of the third season?
I actually have yet to watch it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've held off on it. I was waiting for it to all come out at once so I could binge it, because I knew it was one of those shows that I would want to do that with, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But
do me a favor, send me a message after you see. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really was a special show.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to it, just on the premise of, obviously, original people returning, but people being involved, such as David Bowie, Trent Reznor, and the likes. So like that intrigued me as well. So I'm sure I'm going to love it. But I'm going to binge that at some point.
I just feel, thank God I live in a world where David Lynch can return and still make film, still make his best work he has made.
Right.
I mean, that year, I think that was the same year that that Mad Max won the Oscar. And what you have men in their late 70s who are doing the best work they've ever done.
Yeah, right.
That is awe-inspiring.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Especially to this idea that you don't have, if you haven't peaked yet at whatever age, it's still possible. These guys are doing the best work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another example we could use. A famous example would be George Miller as a director and the Mad Max movies, especially if you saw the more newer one, Fury Road with Tom Hardy. And there is tons of pop art elements in that movie.
Yeah.
It is just littered with it. And George Miller's a fantastic, I think he's a very underrated film director in general. And, but yeah, that's another good example for folks. If you're listening and watching today and not real sure what pop art is, to go to that. You made this comment earlier about, that familiar face, but you can't figure it out. I thought that was really funny because it made me immediately think of the guy you had in Marguerite Moment, and that's Tom Noonan. Tom Noonan is an actor that's in so many things that people start to realize, like, hey, wait a minute, that guy looks familiar.
Right.
And I also think he's a guy that, like, gets mistaken sometimes for John Malkovich for whatever reason. Yeah. But they do have a similar look, but not exactly the same. However, he's been in so much stuff: RoboCop 2, Synecdoche, New York, Heat, Manhunter. He's done work with Charlie Kaufman. He's done work with Michael Mann. So, like, I got to know, how'd you get him involved in the project?
Well, in New York, believe it or not, it's a smaller town than you would think. And my lead actor had a friendship with him, which opened up a channel for me to pitch him for it and see what his interest level was. He is now the lead in that. Was just on The Marvelous Miss Maisel, and now he's on Vegas CSI. And then the female, I don't know if you're a fan, the female who plays Karen, the Muse, she plays Sacagawea in Night at the Museum.
Oh, really?
Okay. Okay.
I didn't make that connection. I thought your lead did look familiar, and I've seen a lot of positive stuff on the Marvelous Mabel or whatever the show that is. I think it's on Amazon. Yeah, I've heard a lot of good critical review around that show in particular. I also don't want to pass up on FOET, though. FOET, I love the concept. We talked about it before we got on the call, and that is just kind of I will say, we kind of live in I would say predominantly, I think that's starting to change, conservative nation. And, there's a lot of extreme feelings with, fetuses and are they alive? Are they not alive? All those controversies. And I just love the idea that, especially whenever you made this in the early 2000s, right? Or at least it came out in the early 2000s.
Yeah. I made it in the end of the 90s.
Yeah.
So like 98, I think is when I filmed it.
So very taboo, really, even at the time that you were making this, and kind of this concept and I highly encourage folks to check it out on ianfisher.com. Ian's got all of his stuff, his work there, right there, easy for you to take a look at. And FOET I love. It's got a lot of elements, but in particular, not to give it away without watching it completely, but the handbags that the ladies like inside of the short is made of fetal materials. So, and
do you want me to tell you the log line of the thing?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So, all right, let me just remember this because it's been a while. It's a bored pro-life housewife falls in love with the latest fashion trend to hit Manhattan.
There you go.
Fetal skin purses.
Yeah. And I got to commend you, too, on the intentional, I'm sure, costuming of the shop merchant who looks uncannily like anti-LaVey to an extent.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. So really, I'm just grateful I didn't mess it up. It really started with the short story from F. Paul Wilson. Now, horror fans will know him because his book, The Keep, was adapted by Michael Mann into the movie The Keep, which people seem to like. It's a Tangerine Dream, scored film by Michael Mann, who's, a real technician, a beautiful artist as well, Michael Mann.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so I found the short film. I found the short story, and I remember falling in love with it. So I tracked him down at a book signing and just asked his permission to be able to make it. And he was cool enough and said, sure. And awesome. He actually he is in, for fans of him who know of him, who really love horror, He's actually in the movie as one of the people eating.
Okay. In the background?
In the background, yeah.
That's awesome. I love when they do that.
But that was a film I returned the equipment to my film school the day I graduated, right after I finished shooting that.
Hey, talk about perfect timing, huh?
Right.
That's awesome. It's some of your other work too I wanted to talk with you about, and you
Sure.
mentioned it a few times here too. Rude Dude, the Steve Rude story.
Yeah.
Steve Rude, also a awesome, pop artist himself. And he did some work with Dave Gibbons right toward the end of the 80s, early 90s, I believe it was. And
the world's finest.
Yes, world's finest. And he is a fantastic artist. I likened his art to an extent. If anybody's seen like Alex Ross, but he's famous specifically for Steve Rude, that is the creation of Nexus. And so a lot of people might remember that. I believe it was on Dark Horse in the 80s. It's a DC property. And had a very successful run, and it has a huge cult phenomenon behind it even nowadays. And I know that you had the pleasure of doing that documentary and covering him in particular. How did that project come together?
I grew up a enormous fan of Steve Rude to the point, let's see, I discovered him maybe at 15. I had named my dog Horatio after Nexus. I was such a huge fan. And those World's Finest posters, the Batman, Superman, and the two of them, I had those over my bed in college for many, many years. This guy really inspired me. And before the internet, something filmmakers like I did, or at least maybe I'm the only one who did it, but I would get people's addresses and start a correspondence, a mail correspondence. This is before we had email, really. And or email was something people hadn't fully adopted yet.
Right.
And I befriended him, and I would send him my movies. And so once I finished Magritte Moment, I wanted my next level. And at the time, it was doing a feature. It's since changed, but at the time I had done this. So my thinking, I started doing that feature around 2008. So around that time, that was the common feeling, like, you do shorts, but that's only to get you to features.
Right.
You don't want to stay with shorts too long.
Sure.
Was the common thinking. So my next leveling up was making a feature, even though it was a documentary. And so I pitched him. It took a lot of ups and downs, but it eventually happened. And it was a tough film because it also focuses on his bipolar disorder and all that stuff.
Sure.
And one thing I promised myself two things. One was I wasn't going to make that commercial for the artist about how they're so great and they changed the industry with their work ethic and this and that, like
Sure.
a lot of the comic book artisans, writers,
It's a tired
creators.
trope. It's a tired trope.
It is. And
Yeah.
I just couldn't do that. We both used Crumb as our kind of go-to. And leaning in on that, I also was a little bit of an art film I got to make on my favorite artist, which was something.
Yeah.
But it was something that led me to now, which is I got lost in because I was the editor and so I come from a fiction world. In a fiction world, you know what you're doing. You have your
Sure.
plan. You know what the script is. You know the lines. You know the
Right.
coverage. And when you're doing a documentary, it's almost like you're in the middle of a hurricane and you're just pointing your
Right.
camera, hoping you get something livable,
Right.
that something in focus, something usable. You don't even know what you have until you look at it a day or two later.
Right.
And then you got to kind of, you look at this chaos that you have, which is your raw footage,
Right.
right? which anyone who wants to imagine it, just look at your cell phone and trying to film your friend's birthday party. There's a lot of stuff you want to get rid of.
Yeah.
But you're trying to kind of take a hammer and beat all that footage into some kind of digestible 3-act structure. And the real world does not work that way.
Right.
That's why we like movies, because movies give us the real world in a 3-act structure, hopefully with a happy resolution at the end so we can move on with our lives.
Right. Yeah, and I would imagine that some of it, I even took time to watch some of the behind the scenes clips that you had up on your website in particular. Some of his manic episodes and things of that ilk. Like I'm sure that you were accompanied to some things that hit the editing floor too that were kind of interesting too. And one thing I was, you go into a movie like that and, he's a guy too that, again, as you mentioned earlier, he's known for his bipolar disorder as well. Like, sometimes you go into watching a documentary like that and you're concerned that it's going to be like a PSA for mental health. Not to say that people shouldn't get help with their mental health, but your documentaries sometimes have agendas. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And there's filmmakers for good and for bad that, employ those agendas. Kind of an easy example to use for a lot of people are familiar with is like Michael Moore, for example. Like in his documentaries, he has his little comedic bits that he puts in sometimes. Like the 9/11 documentary, for example, you could go back to that. But, I think you played it relatively straight with the Steve Root story, even though that you did have some artistic flair to it.
I tried to do a fly in the wall and just let him tell the story without manipulating it. And
that's right.
I actually found I spent a lot of time sanitizing it to make the footage more and the story more digestible. Yeah. Because there's some outrageous stuff that happens in it that had me questioning reality. And it certainly didn't help being the person for 2 years staring at the footage.
No, I'm sure.
Of a manically bipolar person who has some personal toxicity and some great beauty. It gets to be a lot to deal with for 2 years.
Yeah.
I was so grateful to be done.
I could imagine, yeah. And whenever you're that close to any material and spending that much time with it, there's probably a level of resentment that starts to build up over time in some aspect.
Yeah, but in that movie, we have Alex Ross in it. I interviewed him. Dave Gibbons is in it as well. These guys are all in love with this classic kind of 1940s illustration aesthetic of this Andrew Loomis, which is much more that kind of more fit body and not that enormously hulked out every vein Dale Keough or Frank Miller type of more cartoony thing.
Right. And I know, on the subject of comic books and what have you, I noticed a trailer out that was still yet being edited, I guess, for Superhero Nation. Is that the project that you alluded to earlier that was impacted by COVID and kind of changed your perspective on things?
It absolutely did. Well, the documentary itself, which was exploring the popularity of superheroes in America and what it says about American culture, it started where I was questioning, why am I still interested in these characters? And this is before everybody's in the world would walk around with the characters on their T-shirts.
Sure.
I remember wearing those in the 90s when you'd almost get beaten up for wearing that stuff. That would be like, the biggest thing was John Bon Jovi had a Superman tattoo, right?
Right.
Or Shaq had one, but that's as far as that it went into the culture. I'm sorry, hold on, I just lost my track. What was the question?
It was just kind of a question as to regarding Superhero Nation in particular and how it was impacted by COVID and so on.
Well, so I was curious as to why I was still into these characters. And what I wanted to do is understand, so what does it say about our culture that it's such a big deal? And so I went and I interviewed over 100 of the experts some who are no longer with us: Stan Lee, Frank Miller, Grant Morrison, Jerry Robinson. I mean, all these different people to find out, well, what does it say that we as a culture look up to these things? And it's very interesting. It bottom lines that, because we're a young culture, unlike Europe, and we've made it up.
Sure.
And it kind of embraces this kind of larger than life mythology we have of each other.
Right.
What, like in the 50s, it was cowboys and like that's what the kids were into back then. That was cool. And then, once war, came back in the 70s, it was no longer cool. But, the idea of why these characters, and if you think about it, there's some scary implications about what we like, which is we like figures who point the way and say, this is right, this is wrong, do this, do that. Mm-hmm. They're easily identifiable using iconic either looks or colors, usually the primary, because that's how they were printed. Right. They make decisions for us. While they save us, they also save us from making a lot of decisions. And this idea, which is no longer, I believe, is popular, I guess it's no longer modern, but a key part of it really was that secret identity.
Sure. Which
was this whole idea if they could only see who I really was, which would be like Superman taking the glasses off, right?
Right.
And so if you look at like, that's popular and we really enjoy that stuff, you see that like things like social media and Twitter jumping onto the loudest voice to beat up essentially total strangers that you don't know who they are. Yeah. You're never going to meet them. You're never going to cross paths with them. But you got to like hold on to that fire hose of hate. Or even our last president. I mean, these are very iconic looking people who are about a brand.
Right.
And those are very attractive things to America. We want to be famous. And what is having your own icon or being like a one name, like Elvis.
Right.
Or Rihanna. I mean, that's like, or Madonna. That's like, I think for most people, that's the utmost of the utmost of what, you could do in America.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas, in the rest of the world, they're just making sure they have enough, shots to help them from, the next wave of COVID or whatever is horrible going on.
Sure. Right. And to hammer down a little bit more on the superhero talk too, I think a lot of the appeal is that idea of the American dream in some respects. And that is, the nice house, the 2-car garage, that sort of thing. And because we get to live a privileged life, a lot of us here in America, we have it much better than the majority of other countries. Even though, yes, we're a young nation, we're looked to as the example globally in some respects. Anytime that there's a global affair going on, everybody looks to America for leadership in some respects. We have painted ourselves in a corner in some respects to make us the hero. And I think that that's a part of the obsession with it as well, is that people aspire to be that it's not a bad thing by any means, but in a way it's almost given us an overinflated sense of self in some respects too.
Absolutely.
I think. And that's a lot of the resentment that people have in America, for America, that is.
With Hollywood and even just with our ownership of IP, superheroes, cartoons, Simpsons, Disney, all that stuff. What we make the coolest culture. That's really what we have. It's no longer our education. It's no longer, necessarily the internet. We make the coolest culture. We make the music. I mean, there's amazing stuff all over the world, of course, but in most people's heads in the world, this full globe, you got to be known in America to break out everywhere else.
Right.
Just being an English sensation or an African sensation. I mean, that's amazing as it is. I mean, if you think about it, having a whole country know who you are, amazing, right?
Right.
But that's not breaking out in this Kim Kardashian explosion of a cottage industry just blurps up out of social media. I mean, through a lot of hard work, obviously, and a lot of managing and brilliance. But to most people, we don't see that part. We just see, wow, that's what famous is now.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it goes into kind of I've heard over the years that America's biggest resource now has become entertainment. That's our biggest global output is entertainment, and I think that there's a solid argument for that. It's back to your point. That is what we're known for nowadays. And I know like the entertainment aspect of things, of course, gets implemented into other areas. So like, for example, even with your work, I know that you're involved with Music Against Myeloma. Is that correct?
Myeloma, yeah.
Myeloma. And now, what is your involvement there outside of hosting? Do you actually do the trailers and the ads or the reels for that?
I did their Indiegogo pitch video years ago. A good friend of mine, Slava Rubin, is the one who created that
organization
fundraiser because he had lost his father to myeloma.
Yeah.
And anymore too, to get attention on such projects such as this too, you have to implement an element of entertainment too. When it comes to like kind of the ad campaigns and stuff to grab people's attention.
Right.
You have to grab people with entertainment, even if it's for a cause or whatever it might be.
That's the cough syrup.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly correct. And, so there's a lot of good that I say that to say this, though, there's a lot of good that entertainment brings outside of just, individual satisfaction and that sort of thing. It goes on to inspire people like in your case, people in my case. That's the reason that I do this is I try to be a springboard for other people, their talents, get exposure to them. Because I would have loved to have this resource in my younger years.
Absolutely.
Not to say that I'm that old, but I'm getting close to 40 now. And back whenever I was in high school and gigging and stuff, I wish there would have been somebody like, hey, come on my show and tell me about your band. I would have just died. I would have thought I hit it big time without question. But
I think it's great what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Sure.
And we're certainly a fan of you and Ian and everything.
Well, thank you so much.
And what should people expect from you present day outside of the daily social media reels? You got anything else in the works you can tell us about?
I am focusing on that. I'm attempting to kind of. I'm still figuring out exactly what it is, but I'm calling them micros. I'm literally trying to make this a legitimate art form in such a way that in LA, I mean, you're looking at 5 years if you're lucky for a project. And that's why so many people have to have so many going at so many times and then also make a living and also do their own thing. And I think with this, I think with what you were talking about, father, right? You both are fathers, and we're noticing attention spans changing, and we're noticing how people consume media.
Right.
And I just have the feeling that we're going to see shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, and people are going to want more anthology-like entertainment.
Sure.
Than movies, because this is what changed my whole thinking and really kind of had me kind of divert from my lifelong goal of you got to make that feature. I want to make my horror feature. What really changed it was Frank Darabont. You know who that is?
Yes, I do.
Right. So that filmmaker was doing a podcast, and what he had said was that movies are the great 20th century art form. But the problem is we're in the 21st century.
Right.
Yeah.
And so with that, with this idea that that it's no longer the equipment, it's no longer the distribution that makes our filmmaking any more unique than China's, than Canada's, than anywhere else. And there was a point where we had the best technicians.
Right.
Right. We were the world leader
Sure.
in this, and the other countries needed America's movies, and they no longer do.
Right.
Correct.
Their work is just as wonderful as some of our best work.
Absolutely.
Well, it really comes down to when. So if movies are dying out as that art form, what we really have is streaming TV.
Right.
And so then, and really what it is we no longer have a music video
Sure.
industry or art form in the way that we
Sure.
had in the 80s, 90s, and early aughts.
Right.
And it's really, after Napster came and changed that industry, there's just no budget. And so with no budget, but that was where a lot of the kind of experimental and a lot of pop art was being done.
Sure. And there's a lot of crossover with music videos and commercials and that sort of stuff, particularly when they were taking off too. And essentially, a music video is a commercial for your album. I mean, what better tool is there to peep into the soul or the essence of an artist other than a music video? I know that to me drew me. I grew up and still yet was pretty decent. Late 80s and 90s. A lot of music videos were popular at that time. TRL was a huge thing.
Yeah, totally.
In my teenage years.
Yeah.
And so, those brought me to buying albums like Blink-182 and Limp Bizkit and stuff like that. Those music videos, Korn, for example. Like whenever you're a teenager and you see stuff like that, you're like, oh my God, my parents are going to hate this. I love it.
Right. It's a rebellion thing.
Right.
But they were also great, test runs for some of our favorite directors out there. David Fincher. And Spike Jonze.
Yep.
And Michel Gondry and all these people. And it's without that now, the only other way that we're going to see this done is people doing it, paying for it themselves and putting it on social media.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's kind of gone back into the short game too. Like shorts, I don't want to say like they're more popular than ever, but that statement might be true. But I know that I'm seeing a lot more access to shorts nowadays compared to, I wasn't even aware of shorts until probably my teenage years in general, what they were. Ever got my hands on one. Sometimes you would get a short paired with a VHS that you would purchase, like it was either at the beginning of a movie or at the end of the movie or something like that. And nowadays YouTube, obviously very accessible to people. That's where a lot of people have their shorts are hosted at. There are film festivals specifically for shorts. We have a friend, previous guest on the show, Douglas Wicker. He had a short that premiered at the Chattanooga Film Festival. They just did a festival up here in St. Louis for short films too. Like, I think shorts are actually starting to get some attention that it used to not have 30 years ago. Are you seeing that from your perspective out there on the East Coast, Ian?
Yes. And I believe, especially as this new generation is growing up with a cell phone out of the womb, already logged into YouTube or onto TikTok, their brains are going to work in a different way than ours do.
Sure.
Just because of the way they process information. And as we're seeing, as a lot of the streaming is kind of hitting the wall, and these companies are trying to, because it's the Wild West, everyone's figuring out what they want, who's going to put what money into what as everyone's pulling back, the one untapped resource we have is literally, let's say even just from the 90s, and that's, we could go even further back, but let's just say from the 90s, you have over 32 years, thousands upon thousands of hours of everyone's short film sitting there doing nothing. No one's watching it. It's all this stuff that
somebody should be monetizing, and there will be savvier businessmen than me who will figure out the best way to do it. Other people have tried.
Sure.
But with that much free already there, it's almost like a huge reservoir of like natural gas that they have yet to like actually tap to drill out and all that.
Absolutely.
And the idea that, when I went to film school and a big part of film school, I would say until about 2004, really was access to equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, a film camera was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you weren't going to lend. If a cinematographer had the loans together to have a Super 16 camera, they were not lending that out to their friends to shoot their thesis film. I mean, those cameras were $200,000. It was very expensive. But since the iPhone, and then as soon as people had a full film studio in their pocket, that changed the game, and that really meant you really, if you had a cell phone, you no longer had any excuse.
Sure.
I mean, before you could, I can't get the $500 to get a video camera. Okay, all right, there's still a hurdle. Understood. And then what do I do with the videotape? I don't know how to edit it. It's too many steps. At this point with your cell phone, there's no excuse.
Right. Even if you don't know how to do it, you can look up a YouTube video and figure out how to do it in 5 minutes. I mean, it's
how I learned After
every
Effects
resources
is
there.
YouTube.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I had to take a class to learn After Effects.
Right.
And that was like in 2001.
Right.
So that was before YouTube was a big thing. I wish I could have learned it from the safety of my home,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the best way.
Right. And I know, like, the first time I heard of, like, films actually even being shot on cell phones just blew my mind. I think it was, like, in the late 2000s, early 2010s. I know that Park Chan-wook had set out to film an entire film on the iPhone at the time.
Yeah, and he did. Did you see it?
He did, yes. And, I mean, you couldn't tell that it was all shot on an iPhone, really, to an extent, especially if you're a fan of just, like, kind of independent films and that sort of stuff. Like, the quality's there, pretty on par with that. And yeah, it blew my mind at the time. I was like, if he can do it, then I could do it. I have an iPhone, and it kind of inspired me to do things here and there. Like some of my friends and I would do like little stop motion stuff with figurines and stuff, just kind of play around. And, but yeah, so if anybody's listening to this today, hopefully, if you ever had that thought in your mind, well, how do I even achieve a dream like this? Know that it's doable and it's accessible.
Yeah. And share it on social media.
Absolutely.
Literally, when I got started, there was nowhere to show this work.
Right.
You would have to beg people, hand them your videotapes, please take a look at my short film. There was nothing because there was no internet. And once it took a while for the internet. I worked in like 99 and 2000 in that web 2.0 bubble in New York.
Yeah.
And we were doing video back then, trying to get it across, the modems and all that. And the infrastructure was not there. There was nowhere to show up to look at this stuff.
Right.
The thing is now, even if you don't want YouTube, you can find people who are making huge livings, monetizing either their artwork or becoming influencers, which is a whole different way of thinking about life, which, I'm not prepared to do, but God bless them.
I hear you.
But that idea that you can make a living just through, I could say either Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, or the Chinese government. But any of those ways are ways that you can create a career.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ian, you've been so generous with your time today. Before you get off here, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a few rapid fire random questions just to peel back the curtain a little bit, get your personality out there with our audience, familiarize you with our fan base. And I'm just going to start with this funny one for you. If you've been given the death sentence, what's your final meal?
Damn, that's a
tough one. Yeah, I know. That's one I struggle with to this day.
You know what? Because I've been in LA for the last couple of years, I say an In-N-Out burger.
There you go. Hey, man, there's nothing wrong with that.
Not cheeseburger. Why not?
Hell yeah. What's your go-to karaoke song?
Oh, man. Suspicious Minds.
Okay.
Elvis.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Nothing wrong with that.
What would you consider to be the most overrated film of all time? And please piss somebody off with this statement. I love it. I love when that happens.
The most overrated movie.
Yeah, that's a tough one too.
Wow. I would say Transformers.
Okay, that's a fair one.
That's a fair one, yeah.
Yeah.
And I love Michael Bay.
Yeah.
I really do, because for what he does, he is a genius for what he does.
Right.
Yeah.
No one outdoes him.
Explosions, right?
Well, the iconic Hero 360 shot that he does too.
I love that, but it's that idea of authorship, which is a controversial subject. But the idea of, is the director the author? Can you watch one scene for 2 minutes and know who that director is, either by the music, the way the framing is, the way the actors are going, what's happening, what kind of shot structure and language they use? And there are very few that actually pull that off. Sam Raimi.
He's one of them. Yeah.
He's one of them.
Absolutely.
Cronenberg.
Absolutely.
Cronenberg. Absolutely. Panos Cosmatos. You know, there are people. John Carpenter. Now, he no longer is making movies, but when he did and you heard his score, you knew that was his damn movie.
Without question.
And so that idea of like you've mentioned Warhol. Well, you know what a Warhol is when you see it.
Sure.
And in this world where everything is now kind of being fudged together by an AI program that's scraping all the other artists' stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's all kind of going to look like the same plastic surgery victim in LA, all the same.
Right.
You know, this idea of an individual signature that is in rebellion to everything looking the same and everything being like, you know, looking so. I guess my point is that not every superhero movie needs to look like a Marvel superhero movie.
Sure.
Right.
Let's make a superhero movie in the Richard Donner universe. Let's make him in other universes and see what they look like. Not everyone has to look like a Zack Snyder one either, you know, but I like that they have both versions.
Right.
For sure.
Exactly.
Right. I like the different flavors, but yes. So anyways.
Well, it's funny that you brought up Transformers and we got on a little side tangent about Michael Bay. And, you know, to your point, you know, it's a Michael Bay film. If anybody saw Family Guy, whenever they did the Michael Bay spoof, and within the first 30 seconds, you knew they were imitating Michael Bay. You know, the big, robust body, sweating, a lot of sexuality, like, you know, and a lot of action, big explosions. Like, you knew that was Michael Bay immediately that they were spoofing on.
Well, I'll tell you real quick what's interesting. That first movie, and I've told people this, you know, because Spielberg also produced it, right?
Yeah.
So that was a weirdly balanced movie where it starts off as an adult movie.
Yeah.
Like those Transformers, like if they're popping out of the desert, they're going to hurt you. People get hurt in that movie. That's not like kids get out of jail free card. Everyone gets hurt. That's an adult movie, right?
Sure.
And I think that was the Michael Bay part. But then when it becomes about Shia LaBeouf is the only person who can save the universe, and it's up to him to grab that, whatever they called it, that Dark Star, whatever it was. But it's literally him grabbing the football. That is a kid's movie. Right. And the reason why that movie's overhyped is it couldn't decide which it wanted to be.
No, I agree.
And that's I believe it's because of having such forceful, amazing artists like Michael Bay and like Steven Spielberg. And here, it just kind of didn't level up properly.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
So films like that, I think, are overrated. Yeah.
For sure. On to another question. What would you consider your favorite vacation spot?
Let's see. My favorite vacation spot, I'm going to have to go with, I had a magical time in Amsterdam once.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, dude.
You fellas ever been?
No, never been. I would like to.
It was pretty magical.
Yeah, I bet that is. I have to get there whenever I can.
I recommend it.
Yeah.
Humanity will eventually meet its demise. What will it be for? What do you think will cause humanity's demise, Ian?
I was just talking about this the other day. I honestly think this we've run out of Adderall in this country. It's serious news. It's totally serious. And so the idea of unmedicated people, being in charge of like airport security, anything, it terrifies me. Yeah. I honestly, I think it's going to be something like that we've been medicating and keeping going, and it's going to run out.
The rug gets swept out from under us.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be COVID because we have shown to be remarkably resilient with that so far. We're still here.
Right.
But I'm worried about the next one.
Sure.
And if people are like this angry about this one and about whether they're going to, it's a very, very different reaction than World War II, where everybody like went and like worked in the factories and everyone bought war bonds. Everyone, sacrificed for the greater good. Now it's more like, screw you, I got to get mine. And it's just where our culture is differently. And I believe that is the negative part of social media.
Sure.
Whereas what I'm doing with mine is using social media to kind of, get a smile a day from somebody.
Yeah, for sure.
I use like some of it is a Trojan horse to like inject the viewer with some art.
Right.
Wrapped around Captain America, there might be something there.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I agree. For sure. What would you consider to be the most underrated film of all time? What's a film that you'd champion in that department?
The Verdict, I think, is one of the greatest movies ever made.
Yeah, great acting.
That's in my top three. Most people consider that screenplay by David Mamet to be the definition of the perfectly structured screenplay and one of the best screenplays ever written, and something I, as a screenplay teacher and many other screenplay teachers, usually refer to. It's usually that screenplay and Witness that people always refer to as the people who can see the world through structure look at that as those two films as things of beauty in a way even I can't comprehend.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a fantastic film writer as well. If you were to be trapped on a desert island, let's assume you have the necessities, so drinkable water, the ability to hunt, trap, catch food, that sort of thing, get your sustenance. What's the one item recreationally that you're bringing?
The problem is, like I say, my cell phone, but maybe the power supply would die out. You know what I would do? I would bring I would have to bring a book because that would be the only thing I could refer back to. I would bring an art book with me. What I have realized is that visually being able to look at something is what activates like my imagination or my memory in a way that I think reading a sentence for other people activates them to be able to get to where it's just different types of brains.
Okay.
So something like that. I mean, I I'm going to go through like this Gilbert and George art book. I was exposed to it about 10. I found it again. And to look at what these people did and to figure out like what did inspire me. Cause I know it really inspired me looking at their work. I'm like, holy damn. Okay. I see it now. But I don't know is how it seeped in such a place at such an early age that, you know, I'm still trying to figure out, well, what exactly did hit me?
Yeah. What was it? Yeah. What caught you? Right.
Well, that's a cool answer too, in the sense that, you know, if you are trapped on a desert island in this hypothetical situation, it gives you the ability to yet again be inspired and occupy your time with either your thoughts or your creativity or whatever the case may be. So I can't say that I've heard that response too many times. So that's kind of cool.
Well, if I brought my computer, it would die out, right? I mean, I don't have an endless source of power, right?
Right.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. No, it's a good thought for sure. And last but not least, what if you a dream project? Money's not an object, time's not an obstacle. What's your dream project?
I want to make a horror feature.
Okay.
And I want to do something within a specific genre. So either it would be a satanic panic 70s.
Hell yeah.
You know, like Run from the Devil type of thing, or like Devil's Reign.
Yeah.
You got that. Or then there hasn't really been an amazing like slasher camper thing since like maybe what? I don't even know, but they stopped making those. One of those teenage slasher type movies would be amazing.
Sure.
Like something along those lines is what I'd really love to make.
Yeah, there's been a few made recently, but they've been very few and far between, and a lot of hit and miss. Like they've been really bad on this kick of like remakes and stuff in particular. But like a newer, more independent one that I saw that I actually enjoyed, it was Final Girls. That was a pretty decent one.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty fun one, without question. And a lot of people talk about Terrifier. I haven't gotten around to watching that yet, but a lot of positive, especially around the most recent Terrifier that came out this year. I think that thing was made for like $500,000, and it's made multi-millions of dollars in excess of what its budget was.
It shows there's hope for independent film.
Yeah,
you know, which is amazing that they have that. But both of those films are fantastic. I personally, now that music videos are gone, what I believe is the only place for experimentation really is in the horror genre.
Yeah.
That's the only place you really have that freedom. You don't have it in superhero movies. You don't have it. I mean, animation is its own thing.
Sure.
So the only place, I mean, it's really, that is the only place is low budget horror movies. And, you know, the thing is, they're so cheap to make.
Right.
If you can make it well enough. I mean, do you know that horror movies do best during times of war or economic strife?
I guess I didn't know that.
The idea behind that is when we as a culture are really stressed out and we're like being squeezed, we need to go into a movie theater or at least watch. I mean, I'm showing my age by saying movie theater, but we would go into movie theaters, and by confronting through watching a horror movie and screaming and shrieking all that, we released all that tension we had because the economy's so bad and all this war's going on and all that stuff's happening. And so those movies do really well during that time. Now, these are some of the darkest times I've ever seen. I mean, with COVID, with politics, with country, everything. So I can only imagine how successful, you know, the next great horror movie could be.
Right. The potential it has.
It's funny that you say that where you see some of the experimentation nowadays taking place is mostly through horror and some of the subgenres. Like, I'll say one of the more original films that I've seen in the last few years was It Follows. And the idea of, as simple as the idea was, you would have thought that perhaps it had been already thought of in some respects, in the sense that there was a horror essentially tied to that it was sexually transmissible. And you would think, you know, oh, that seems like somebody should have already made that movie, but nobody did, and certainly made it well. That also had a fantastic score with it too. That's another prominent thing that sticks out to me. Almost Carpenter-esque at time with the synths and that sort of thing. But I also feel like, Panos himself as a director too. We mentioned him earlier. He's another director that's kind of revolutionary in some respects. The Babadook, I felt like, was a pretty Jennifer Kent movie that was relatively, again, another movie that was kind of outside the box in anything coming out recently in horror.
A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night.
Absolutely.
That's a great one.
That's another great one for sure, without question. So, yeah, well, we'll see what we can do to get you that infinite budget and infinite time so you can make feature. Ian, we thank you so much today for your time.
Gentlemen, it was a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You've been a fantastic sport, and we hope to stay in touch with you even after this.
Absolutely. Please do.
And look forward to your drop tomorrow and every day after that. You got a fan
guys.
here.
I appreciate it. Take care. Stay safe.
Yes, you too, sir. Thank you so much.
Hey, this is Josh from ATI Podcast. For show updates and news about the podcast, follow us on social media. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/ATI Podcast22, on Twitter at podcast_ATI, on Instagram at the ATI Podcast, on TikTok at ATI Podcast. DMs are always welcome. Have a question for the show? You can always email us at atipodcastquestions@gmail.com. Stay safe out there.
This is Barrett from the ATI Podcast. Each week, Josh and I discuss current events, pop culture, music, TV, movies, politics, sports. Nothing is out of bounds. You can also tune in to learn about rising artists, small businesses. Whether it's music, graphic design, filmmaking, or even a brick-and-mortar mom-and-pop shop, we will be spotlighting folks and their endeavors. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Anchor, or anywhere you enjoy your podcasts. Just search ATI Podcast. We would like to thank you for your continued support, and as always, please stay safe out there.